Welcome to the Word for Life podcast, a daily devotional covering the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation.
Ruth chapter 2 speaks of how Ruth got a breakthrough in her life. You see, Bethlehem in Israel was a foreign country to her. She had no chance of being blessed there. But this chapter tells us how she made a living and also found the Lord's grace. First of all, Ruth was a resourceful woman. In verse 2, she told her mother-in-law Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Friends, it must not have been easy for Ruth to go to someone's field and pick up leftover grain. You see, if you read Leviticus chapter 19 verse 9 and 10, God commanded the Israelites to allow orphans, widows and the poor to pick up the leftover grain. But you see, this was the time of the judges. And as we saw in our study of the book of Judges, hardly any Israelite followed the law of Moses. Everyone did what seemed fit in their eyes. Yet, Ruth went to someone's field and hoped that she will find favor in someone's eyes. Ruth was a resourceful person. Similarly, Paul the Apostle, when he reflected upon his ministry, said in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 12 that the Lord considered him as trustworthy and appointed him to his service. Friends, the Lord blesses our faithful work and our resourcefulness. In Ruth chapter 2 verse 7, the people working in Boaz's field tell Boaz that Ruth came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. That is a testimony of how Ruth was a resourceful person. In this chapter, we read how Ruth was blessed with God's grace. In verse 3, we see that she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. Ruth did not plan or didn't even know that there was a field for Boaz. But it just turned out. Not only that, in verse 4 we read, "Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem." On the same day when Ruth entered the field of Boaz, Boaz also came from Bethlehem. Friends, the Lord graciously orchestrated the events so beautifully for Ruth. Our Lord brings the right people into our lives. You see, Boaz was such a great blessing for Ruth. In verse 9, he told her, "Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the woman. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." The rest of the chapter reveals the godly character of Boaz. You see, Boaz was a very blessed man, but also a godly man. Again, remember that he lived during the time of the judges. Yet, unlike the other Israelites, Boaz was fully oriented towards the Lord. When he was told that Ruth was a Moabite, Boaz did not treat her like a Moabite. In fact, in verse 11, he told Ruth, I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. Boaz only appreciated Ruth for coming to Israel. And then in verse 12, Boaz blessed Ruth. Verse 12 reads, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Friends, even though Ruth said in verse 13, "I do not have the standing of one of your servants," Boaz did not treat Ruth like a slave. From verse 14 to 16, we read, "At mealtime, Boaz said to her, 'Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar.' When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, 'Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her.'" Friends, godly people reward those who are resourceful. When godly people see well-meaning people who do work faithfully, they reward them with what they have. You see, this is the pattern in the ministry of Jesus. Whenever Jesus saw men or women who showed faith, who showed character, he always appreciated them, encouraged them, and rewarded them. Friends, you and I can learn a lesson from Boaz. We could also reward people for their faithfulness, for their resourcefulness.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow for the next episode of the Word for Life podcast.